In February 2005, within the upscale aisles of Bloomingdale's in White Plains, New York, an unusual trio navigated the housewares department. Among them were a Gambino family capo, a captain, and a massive 400-pound man. To a casual observer, they might have looked like affluent shoppers, but the reality was far more lethal. The 400-pound man, adorned with a Rolex and a diamond ring, was also wearing a hidden wire. His name was Joaquin Garcia, a Cuban-born FBI agent. He stood a mere 3 feet away from men known to have used power drills on human skulls. In this world, a single misplaced gesture or a suspicious hug could result in instant death. For 2 years, Garcia lived a double life. He shared breakfast with professional killers, provided them with bugged communication devices, and recorded hundreds of hours of incriminating evidence. He operated under the constant threat that a single slip-up, even the mispronunciation of a pasta dish, could lead to his execution. Eventually, the Gambino crime family attempted to make him, offering him sworn membership into La Cosa Nostra. This was only the second time in the history of the FBI that an undercover agent had successfully penetrated the organization to such a depth. Garcia fooled the most paranoid criminal syndicate in America through a combination of lavish spending, stolen jewelry provided by the government, and a mastery of the specific dialects of the New York underworld. However, the operation nearly collapsed during that afternoon at Bloomingdale's. When a mob captain seized a crystal candlestick and began a brutal assault on a bystander, every gangster present expected Garcia to participate. He hesitated for 1 second. In the Mafia, hesitation is often interpreted as a death sentence. To understand how a Cuban-born agent maintained this deception for 700 days, one must look at the meticulously crafted strategy the FBI employed to breach the Gambino inner circle. The FBI's path into the Gambino family did not begin with a grand design to topple the organization. It began in the gritty environment of a Bronx strip club. This venue, which cycled through names like the Mirage and the Crazy Horse, was a hub for high spending and criminal extortion. Albanian mobsters were attempting to move into Gambino territory, and the club's owner, Peter "Fat Pete" Forchetti, found himself caught in the middle. Already facing extortion charges, Forchetti was flipped by federal prosecutors. They didn't just want his testimony, they wanted him to serve as a doorway. Simultaneously, Bureau Intelligence identified a volatile opportunity. Greg DePalma, a veteran Gambino captain, was finishing a prison sentence. Rumors circulated that some within the family wanted him dead, fearing he might have become a liability or a talker. When DePalma walked out of federal custody on February 20, 2003, he did not retire. Instead, he began rebuilding his crew with the desperation of a man on borrowed time. He was eager to reclaim his old rackets, and crucially, he was willing to talk. The FBI launched a 3-pronged assault. First, they planted bugs throughout DePalma's daily routine. Second, they utilized Forchetti to provide DePalma with compromised, bugged cell phones. Third, they introduced an undercover agent into the inner circle. This agent would have to walk a metaphorical frozen lake where every step was calculated and every crack could be fatal. La Cosa Nostra is engineered to repel outsiders, utilizing a rigid hierarchy and the sacred oath of omertà. Traditionally, made members must be male and of Italian descent. Penetrating this firewall is a high-stakes, one-take operation. In 2002, the FBI built the persona of Jack Falcone from the ground up. He was envisioned as a Miami-based jewelry fence and thief, flashy, generous, and flush with cash. He drove luxury cars and wore expensive Italian suits tailored to accommodate his 400-pound frame. The choice of Joaquin Garcia was audacious. As a Cuban-born agent, he did not fit the traditional profile of a Mafia associate. However, the Bureau bet on the fact that criminals prioritize vibes over DNA tests. Garcia possessed an enormous amount of charisma and a smile that could disarm a room. His presence was so commanding that people tended to ask, "Who is that guy?" rather than, "Is that guy a cop?" To maintain the illusion, Garcia worked with a handler, Nat Parisi. They met in inconspicuous public places, Home Depot parking lots, gas stations, and diners to swap recording equipment and intelligence. These meetings were like a high-stakes relay race. Dropping the baton meant a coffin. Together they refined mob school. This wasn't about weapons training. It was about the nuances of culture and consumption. In undercover work, it isn't always a gun that kills an agent. Sometimes it's a menu. Garcia had to learn the specific dialect of the mob. In a civilian setting, one might say manicotti, but in a room full of wise guys, it was manigot. A single mispronounced syllable at a dinner table could lead to a shallow grave. They practiced cash handling, never using a wallet, but instead wrapping thick rolls of bills in a rubber band taken from a head of broccoli. They even practiced social engineering, learning how to disarm a dangerous man by complimenting his shoes or his watch, shifting his focus away from suspicion and toward his own ego. When Forchetti introduced Jack Falcone to Greg DePalma, he claimed Jack had a financial stake in the strip club. Garcia was suddenly face-to-face with a hardened captain. DePalma's initial filter wasn't ethnicity. It was utility. He tested Garcia almost immediately, asking if he had ever belonged with wise guys. Garcia's answer, that he only worked with Cubans, should have been a red flag. Instead, DePalma accepted it because he didn't need a relative. He needed a revenue stream. By June 2003, Falcone had been placed on record with the Gambino family, meaning he was under their formal protection. This status wasn't bought with charm, but with significant cash flow. Garcia leaned into the mob's core operating principle: money is proof. In the Mafia, the highest compliment isn't you're loyal, it's being a good earner. The hierarchy functions as a pipeline, where money flows upward and protection flows downward. As long as Falcone was profitable, the organization was willing to overlook a suspiciously perfect smile or a Cuban accent. Garcia provided DePalma with a constant stream of tribute: counterfeit cigarettes, expensive jewelry, flat-screen televisions, and high-end electronics. These goods, supplied by the FBI's evidence room, made the performance look effortless. Garcia referred to himself as the goose that laid the golden egg, and DePalma was more than happy to collect. DePalma's greed was strategic. He wanted to maintain the image of a successful Westchester businessman while running illegal rackets. He often turned mundane errands into mob business, conducting board meetings in the aisles of Costco, discussing extortion payments while pushing a shopping cart. He was obsessed with appearances. His cars were washed daily, and he rotated through different vehicles: compact sedans, convertibles, and luxury SUVs, ensuring any scratch was buffed out immediately. Yet, while the exterior was immaculate, Garcia noted that the interior of DePalma's life was chaotic. For 2 years, Garcia wore a wire during every encounter. He even succeeded in handing DePalma a bugged cell phone. Despite DePalma's old-school paranoia and his habit of ditching phones, he accepted the gift from Falcone. In a world where nothing is written down, gifts serve as social currency. Even when DePalma grew suspicious of a vehicle near his breakfast spot and threw the phone away, the FBI managed to plant a fresh bug in the replacement phone he requested. While the technology provided the evidence, the daily routine provided the intelligence. Garcia and Parisi met up to 5 times a day to exchange recording gear. In Garcia's mind, he maintained a constant checklist of Italian food terms and mob etiquette. DePalma was a constant talker, detailing extortion schemes, loan sharking operations, and mob taxes on construction projects. A mandatory 2% fee just for a project's right to exist. This was business racketeering, masquerading as etiquette, enforced by the threat of violence. The deeper Garcia went, the more he realized that the Mafia was not a brotherhood of honor, but a business of fear. He described DePalma as the devil incarnate, the same man who had used a power drill on a theft suspect. When such a man tells a joke, you laugh as if your life depends on it. However, the suspicion never truly evaporated. DePalma frequently questioned if Falcone was 100%, a phrase that, in this world, is a 3-syllable death sentence. Garcia responded by tightening his performance, ensuring every cash count and every compliment was perfect. Falcone's schedule belonged to DePalma. Trusted associates a part of the daily routine, which usually began at diners. These 2-hour sessions of eggs and coffee were essentially checks on Falcone's character. When the bill arrived, Garcia always reached for it. In mob slang, a man who costs more than he produces is a brockster, and being labeled one is a professional death sentence. By always paying, Garcia reinforced his image as a provider. The routine often included visits to the United Hebrew Geriatric Center, where DePalma's son lay in a coma. DePalma effectively turned the nursing home room into a mob office, issuing threats and planning crimes at his son's bedside. He told Garcia that the Mafia was his true family, and that if the boss calls while your child is dying, you leave the child to answer the boss. Garcia found these moments the most difficult. He had to sit there wearing a wire, unable to show any sign of human decency, because flinching at DePalma's coldness would have been considered suspicious behavior. The afternoon shifts moved to Italian restaurants, where food was the primary vehicle for the operation. Every shared meal was an unannounced exam. Garcia had to order food with the precision of a man defusing a bomb, knowing that a single wrong syllable could detonate his entire cover. Nights were spent back at the strip club, surrounded by men arguing over who would pay for appetizers while planning multi-million-dollar crimes. The stress of the lie took a physical toll. Garcia gained 80 pounds over the course of the operation. He didn't turn to alcohol to manage the pressure. He turned to pastries. The lie began to live inside his body. His weight, his habits, and his appetite all became layers of operational cover. At night, when he removed the wire, he often wondered who he was without the Jack Falcone costume. The operation took a dangerous turn when DePalma began talking about straightening out Falcone. He wanted to make Jack an official member of La Cosa Nostra. On tape, DePalma's voice is clear. "One thing I'm pushing ASAP is you. For an undercover agent, this promotion is actually a trap with no exit. Once sworn in, there is no retirement plan. It is a lifetime commitment enforced by death. Becoming a made man requires an initiation ritual, a finger pricked for blood, a saint's card set ablaze in the candidate's hands, and an oath of silence. This ancestral firewall was designed to reject outsiders. Yet Garcia's performance was so convincing that it became a skeleton key. The organization's paranoia was focused outward, while the real threat was already at the table, paying for dinner. Garcia was only the second FBI agent to receive such an offer. The first was Joseph Pistone, also known as Donnie Brasco, who spent 6 years inside the Bonanno family. Pistone's story proved that the Mafia does not forgive, they archive betrayal. Following his operation, a $500,000 contract was placed on his life, a price tag that never expires. The FBI leadership was split. Some saw an unprecedented opportunity to have a sworn agent in the inner sanctum of the Gambino family. Others saw a countdown to a fatal catastrophe. The deeper Garcia went, the more likely he would be ordered to commit a crime he could not refuse, such as a murder. Garcia developed a desperate contingency plan. If he were ever ordered to take a ride to commit a hit, he would fake a massive cardiac arrest, forcing an ambulance call to escape the situation. As the initiation ceremony approached, the tension reached a breaking point. Other crew members began to scrutinize Falcone more closely. Even DePalma wondered aloud if his protege was truly 100%. Then, the incident at Bloomingdale's occurred. Just 2 weeks before the planned arrests, and across the street from the FBI field office, the performance cracked. When a mobster grabbed a crystal candlestick and began beating a man, Garcia froze. For a split second, his instincts as a law enforcement officer overrode his training as an undercover agent. He did not join the violence. In a world where violence is the expected response, his hesitation was a glaring flaw. Afterward, he felt the atmosphere shift. The quiet recalculations in the eyes of the gangsters told him everything he needed to know. The FBI, hearing the shift in tone on the wire, made a definitive choice. They pulled Garcia out. They didn't wait for the mob to discover him. They acted because he was hours away from being compromised. A massive, coordinated takedown was set in motion. On March 9, 2005, federal agents launched a series of raids across New York. 32 mob figures, including high-ranking members like Arnold Zeke Squitieri and Anthony Megal Megale, were arrested before dawn. Greg DePalma was pulled from his bed. This was not a standard street bust. It was a surgical strike built on the 700 days Garcia spent undercover. The charges were extensive: extortion, loan sharking, illegal gambling, and the specific assault at Bloomingdale's. The evidence was overwhelming because it consisted of the defendants' own voices. The recordings were time-stamped and preserved, making it impossible for the gangsters to argue against their own words. Every defendant eventually pleaded guilty, with the exception of Greg DePalma. DePalma went to trial in 2006, attempting to play the health card. He appeared in court in a wheelchair, performing the theater of frailty in hopes of garnering sympathy. However, the jury listened to the tapes and convicted him. Interestingly, DePalma was acquitted of the Bloomingdale's assault itself, the very event that nearly ended Garcia's life. But racketeering laws do not require a single punch. They require a pattern of behavior, and that pattern was indisputable. At his sentencing in September 2006, DePalma was given more than 12 years in prison. The climax of the entire 2-year operation occurred in that courtroom when Jack Falcone stepped onto the witness stand and identified himself as Special Agent Joaquin Garcia. DePalma's expression was one of absolute shock and betrayal. It was a profound humiliation. The system he dedicated his life to had not only been infiltrated, but had actively promoted the infiltrator. DePalma died in a federal medical facility in 2009 at the age of 77. The man who claimed, "The family is your real family," died in custody, destroyed by the very trust he demanded from his subordinates. The story of Joaquin Garcia reframes the understanding of the American Mafia. Their greatest weapon was never just violence. It was a system of rituals, oaths, and blood requirements designed over generations to keep the world out. However, those rules were a blindfold. They looked for strangers and filtered for bloodlines, but they failed to account for a man who understood their vibe better than they did. Garcia succeeded because he understood that in the modern mob, profit outweighs ancestry. He wrapped his cash in broccoli rubber bands, complimented the right shoes, and mastered the dialect of the dinner table. He smiled until the dangerous questions stopped being asked. The Gambino family trusted him because he made them money, and they nearly made him a member because they were proud of that money. Garcia's survival is a testament to a performance that held together for exactly 700 days, long enough to dismantle a hierarchy from the inside out.